Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the weekending team. On today's show, hello spring. Tom Pattinson's getting the pruning gear out, but please do consider carefully before you chop. Tom's here to give us a steer. Tom Cadwallender's muckle glad to be back, and he's enjoying woodpeckers and fieldfares at dawn. And swanning around a bit, as always. And we have an exciting update from the latest archaeological dig at Lindisfarne, and some amazing new finds. Plus some top tips for the garden from Tom P, all coming up on the Nature Garden podcast.
Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline.
Hello, and a very merry spring to you. Shrubby structure is an important element to any garden, but it isn't always easy to know what to do to keep everything growing and when it's best to give things a bit of a trim. Well, not to me, but fear not. Help is at hand here with Tom Pattinson. Hello again, Tom P.
Hello. Trees and shrubs are one of the things that help form structure in my garden, and they're all underway with growth at the moment. Spring is here, of course. It's one of the things that tend to confuse people and often ask questions this time of year. How should I prune my, and when should I prune my? This applies to the whole range of shrubs, which of course includes roses. For 2 or 3 months now, people have been saying, when do I prune my roses and how much do I move from them? You can't prune them all at once. Wouldn't it be convenient if we could? All in one day. That's a shrub pruning done for the year. But it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. They flower at different times. I love the fact that in this garden we have colour year-round, and that is mainly due to woody perennials, those shrubs I'm talking about. So, you have to have a little plan. And generally speaking, not a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, as soon as they finish flowering, if they need pruning at all, I'll step in and prune them. Some of them flower on the current year's growth that's just now starting as small shoots, which will ripen before summer. Buddleia and Lavatera shrubs are part of this. That's good examples, actually. It will ripen and flower. But some other shrubs, they flowering on stems or wood, which was produced last year, ripened going into winter, and is now just right for flowering. I'm thinking about things like Forsythia, that beautiful yellow shrub, which is, there are lots of different cultivars of it, varieties of it, which are flowering now, lighting up the garden with golden colour. Beautiful. So, my theory is, and I put it into practice, it always has been, anything that's flowered from, say, last November, and that included the jasmine, the yellow winter jasmine, no fragrance, they're beautiful flowers on them, and the viburnums, Bodonanthense dawn, which are deciduous, the Bodonanthense types. They lose their leaves, beautiful leaf colour before they lose those leaves, and then fantastic pink flowers come out, highly fragrant, and they light up with their fragrance, if that's possible, the winter garden all the way through from last November, and they're still flowering now. But the flowering is coming to an end. So if I need to reduce the height of my viburnum dawn, now's the time to do it, just before all those leaves start into new growth, which will produce the flowers in November again. The other viburnum, which I'm pruning at the moment, is Viburnum tinus, Tinus, that's the species. It grows evergreen, totally different to the Bodonanthense type. It keeps its leaves. The birds love it for cover, for nesting, and it it encourages a whole host of insects, which is a good thing for the garden as well, of course. That's being pruned at the moment. These are plants which have flowered from last November through to just, let's say, April period, May even, because we've got other things coming up on the rails to flower fairly soon. So don't go around pruning willy-nilly shrubs at the moment, because some of them you might just be removing the very flowering wood that you're looking for. The other type are those that flower from May onwards, and that's things like the let's see now, which is the best one to take as an example. I would say something like the budlegia. Yes, budlegia. It used to be called butterfly bush, still is, that's a common name, and it grows from 0 at the moment almost. Mine is about 2 feet tall, 60 centimetres, and that was to save it over winter time. It's a tough shrub, of course, but it grows up to almost 2 metres from now until July, August. Really rapid growth, and has those long flower spikes on it, beautiful, drooping, and brings the butterflies in, and the bees, of course. And that one, before the wind damage gets a chance in the winter time, autumn and winter, I have to reduce the height to stop windrock, which loosens the roots of the plant. And then just before we start into the spring, it's reduced further down to about 2 feet or 60 centimetres again. Pruning isn't straightforward. Find out when the plant's flowering, and immediately after flowering, if it needs pruning, prune it then.
Spring has truly sprung, and the light nights are arriving, and Tom Cadwallender's an excited chap. Well, isn't he always? And he's been out to catch the birds at dawn, including flocks of fieldfares. Welcome back, Tom C.
All this talk of summer visitors getting back to England, UK, Northumberland at the start of the breeding season is all very good, but actually there's still a few winter birds around, and it's great. I'm out on site this morning. It's just gone about 20 past 6. Dawn was about 20 minutes ago, and it was amazing, actually. Yeah, there's a few chiff-chaffs singing, but actually I'm on these fields. I'm near the border, and I've just stumbled upon this flock of almost 300 fieldfares. Fieldfares are the kind of they're just lifted. Oh, goodness me. These birds are gathering now, ready for their kind of migration back across the North Sea, back into Scandinavia. They're amazing. Oh, I just heard a great spotted woodpecker go. Oh, I don't know if you can hear that. Great spotted woodpecker drumming. But yeah, these fieldfares, there's about 300 of them, and they're gathering in these fields. And fieldfares are the largest of the thrushes that we have, and they're here for the winter. Now, these birds are quite funny because they traditionally will come across in very big numbers. But in recent years, because of climate change, I suppose, they've been spending time across, not making the journey. You can hear them jack, 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 jack. Great, actually. They're not making the journey because it's quite perilous having to cross the North Sea, of course. And so they're spending time back in southern Scandinavia. I've got a friend who lives in Helsinki, and he often tells me about fieldfares gathering big flocks in the parks in Helsinki during sort of early winter time. So they'll not be pushed out of there until the weather gets really bad, and then they'll cross over. But anyway, they're here, and these fieldfares they're really quite special. They're about the size of our missel thrush, just smaller than a jackdaw, and they've got sort of grey patches, but they've got this warm sort of buffy colour on their breast with speckles. If you're so inclined, have a look and look them up, and you'll find them such a beautiful bird, these fieldfares. So I've been really quite privileged this morning, actually, just stumbling upon this group, and we're perhaps about sort of 20 miles from the coast. So they're getting ready to head off on their migration, and this whole kind of pre-riot migration restlessness is the Germans have a great word for it. It's Zgunra. And it's just basically pre-migration restlessness, but it captures so much. For me, it does anyway, because I'm a bit of an old romantic. But yes, it was great fun. But yes, and whilst I was standing just chatting to you, there was a great spotted woodpecker. I've heard so few great spots around this year, this winter. In fact, there's fewer in northern England than there has been in the past. But that was a little bit of a bonus. Oh, great stuff. What a wonderful morning this is. This bird watching malarkey is great fun. Ha! On birds, brilliant.
Archaeological digs offer a chance to discover so many things about the past and how we lived, and the digs on Lindisfarne have been, well, revelatory. I caught up with David Petts, Associate Professor in the Department of Archaeology at Durham University, for an update on the amazing finds of the Dig Ventures team on Holy Island.
We're here exploring the archaeology of Lindisfarne. In the early Middle Ages, in the times of the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings, the monastery here on the island was one of the biggest and most important monasteries in all of Britain. So it would have been a huge site, incredibly important, produced for Lindisfarne Gospels. And it's that early medieval monastery that we've been exploring with our project. I think one of the key things we've been really appreciating is the sheer scale of the early monastery. Most of our work's been in one field quite close to the later medieval priory, but also we've been excavating another site right on the northern side of the village where there's another cemetery, another early cemetery. And really, when you go back and look at all the old records, it's quite clear that the early medieval monastery extended from the Hoof all the way to the north side of the village. It was absolutely huge, and we're just excavating maybe 1% of that total surface area.
That's very hard to contemplate because that's huge for the size of the island.
Yeah, it's very big, but I think it wouldn't all have been built up. There would have been paddocks and workshops and stables and probably kind of gardens and places for animals to graze. So it wouldn't have all been one massive built-up block of buildings. There would have been multiple churches, though, and multiple cemeteries. They would have been doing all sorts of things all over the area of the village. It could be a difficult place to live, it could be violent, it could be brutal, but also they were capable of these amazing works of art. So things like the Lindisfarne Gospels are just absolutely exquisite. Also, from our excavations, it kind of humanises people, because one of the things we found are a couple of gaming pieces now. So people are playing board games, they're probably drinking, they probably had evenings in front of the fire, playing a board game, drinking some wine. And you can imagine doing that nowadays. We've played kind of Viking board games in the pub here when we've been digging. So you get those connections with the past.
But these gaming pieces are really special, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really nice. They're beautiful, very small, about a centimetre high, blue glass and decorated with white trails. The ones we found are clearly quite high status. You do find other gaming pieces from this period made of things like little bits of animal bone or little bits of scrap lead, but the ones we've got would have belonged to someone quite important.
And I wonder how that person lived and what they ate and what their health was like and how they went about their own sort of worship and their planning and farming and fishing. Have you got more of an insight this year into any of that?
Well, I think one of the things we are getting is because we're excavating skeletons, human remains, is they open up a real potential to look at some really interesting stories, because we can see both how old they are, but we can find out things like where people came from, what kind of food they ate. We can do some very sophisticated analyses of the chemistry of the bones. We can extract DNA from the bones to see who's related to who within the cemetery. We're also excavating a lot of animal bone, probably from the kitchens, so we get a sense of the diet that people are eating, and they're eating things that we would eat, like beef and pork and lamb, but also they're eating lots of fish. But then stranger things, so they're eating whale, they're eating seal, They're eating birds like puffins, which we would never think of eating today, but for them was just part of their normal diet. So it kind of it brings the past alive a little bit, and it makes realise that sometimes they do things very similar to us, like play board games, but also they do some very strange things like row off to the Farne Islands and harvest puffins to eat.
A couple of the finds that you've got this year are really quite extraordinary, aren't they, David?
Yeah, we've always had some nice finds. So this year we've had our second piece of gaming piece. It's a bit more broken up than the one we found previously, but when you put them together, hold them next to each other, which we've been able to do, they're exactly the same. So they're clearly from the same set. We've also always had a bit of sculpture from the site, a bit of carved stone. But this year we've had 2 what are called name stones, which are little grave markers. And we found some of those previously, but the ones we found this year are particularly nice, really rather splendid. We've also found a big chunk of a what we call a high cross, which would have been a tall stone cross, maybe 2 meters high or even higher, with a large meter-wide stone cross head at the top. We've got a big chunk of that cross head. It's by far the nicest and heaviest thing we found on site, and we can see. Well, on one side, we've got what looks like an image of a bird, and there's some kind of dragon or monster on the other side. So we're still going to have to do a lot of thinking about precisely what's being shown on that, but it's been a particularly nice find. It's probably my favourite from this year.
So yet more evidence of the beautiful attention to detail, the craft, the art of the people of that time period, David.
Yeah, I mean, when we find these things now, they've been in the soil for a long time. They're a bit muddy. They've been a bit battered around. But when they would have been new, they would have been these amazing monuments. They would have been crisply carved, often painted, sometimes with metal settings or glass settings in them. So they would have been these amazing kind of multimedia pieces of public art, really. And we're just seeing them in a very poorly preserved state. But yeah, but the monastery must have been amazing with all these crosses standing everywhere.
Was there any more about was it the iron works or charcoal works you were looking at this end of the sanctuary and that the biggest sort of trench?
Yeah, we've got an area where there was early medieval metalworking. So we found little globules of molten copper. We found bits of crucible for melting the metal down. Frustratingly, as with so much of a site, it had been badly cut up by later grades. But we still, this year, were able to excavate a tiny bit of what we think would have been one of the ovens or hearths they used to heat the metal. And we're currently excavating through a large ditch just next to it. And fingers crossed, hopefully, maybe next year, we might find some of the clay mould fragments which they use for making the objects. That's on my bucket list for next year.
Keeping and improving a garden structure can be a bit of an art form, but we can all follow some basic rules to keep us and the garden right. And here's the second part of Tom's top tips for pruning and how and when to cut back clematis.
Some shrubs need very little pruning at all, so why prune them? And a good example, I guess, is the hydrangea, with those big mop head or lace cap, whichever type of bloom you go for. Those heads are quite often left on the plant over winter. Some people take them off and spray them and use them in floral arrangements, fair enough, but it's far better if you leave them on as I do mine, because they offer some frost protection. The frost hits them first, and the little beneath there, the embryo buds, which will bring the following year's flowers, they're protected. So at the present time, we nip those heads off and go down to the first pair of shoots of potential buds just below, and that's where growth starts from. Another one, say, is the hebe or veronica. It grows on the tips of the generally speaking of the shoots. It can flower twice during the year. I'm looking at 2 or 3 veronica in the garden at the moment, or hebes, and I've left the tips on those as well. The dead flowers from last year, they offer some protection. And so all the pruning it needs now is remove those dead flowers and let the others have a chance, send shoots up with flowering buds on. Also, a little point about Hebe, for example, the Veronica, commonly called. It can get quite tall and woody. So if you're going to prune it severely, say as soon as the really nasty frost has gone, we're talking about the end of April, getting towards May, that's when I prune it. But before I cut anything off, I look, say it's standing about 1 metre tall. I look down inside the stem, follow the stem down from the tip, and where I see buds emerging, that's safe to prune back to those. Don't prune away into old wood, old stems, if there's no sign of buds emerging. So that's really straightforward. A general rule when you're pruning at all, and this is light pruning, is to look at the bush, the shrub that you're pruning, and remove all the dead or diseased wood. That's going nowhere at all. It's just spoiling the plant. Get dieback and pieces of wood that are dead, any breaks in the stem, any stems that are crossing and will rub together when the wind comes and cause a wound which will let in disease. That's the first thing. Then after that, look at the thing, and if it's a deciduous plant, if you can leave it until it's deciduous, you get a far better view of what needs pruning out and what does not. This applies not only to shrubs, but also to soft fruit bushes such as the gooseberry, the red currant, blackcurrant, etc. So, next thing I had in mind was to mention clematis. At the moment, there's a super clematis, evergreen, an evergreen clematis, imagine. It's called Armandii. I'll say Armandii. And it's a species, Armandii, but there's some cultivars of that species, beautiful. White flowers, slight fragrance to them. And it's as tough as old boots, but it looks beautiful. It's flowering strongly at the moment. Meanwhile, the clematis that flower in summertime, they have no growth on at all dead stems, sometimes going up to 1 metre, 2 metres, even 3 metres up a wall or a fence. Looks like dead growth, but very soon, if not by now, there'll be some shoots showing there. So, those ones, you prune them back, the summer flowering ones, after June, the ones that flower after June, you prune them back at this time of year, down to about 2 or 3 feet again, say 1 metre, possibly, or even some people can cut them down to prune them back to below 2 feet. And here's a little thing that I follow in relation to, it's general, but in relation to clematis, it's an old thing I learned as a young gardener. It goes, clematis, those that flower in May and June, you should hardly ever prune. Those that flower all summer through, prune them hard. That's what you do. So, what's coming up shortly? Clematis montana, beautiful pink variety, different cultivars of Clematis montana, about May and June. So all of those, hardly ever prune them unless they're getting too rampant, and then you can prune them back just to control them a wee bit. Enjoy your gardening, and certainly don't worry about pruning. Just look at the plant and think, now when are you flowering? And generally speaking, after flowering. If there's any pruning essential or needed, do it then.
Bird watching is a proper passion for Tom Cadwallender, as we know, and he's marking the turn of the season with chiff-chaffs, and he's observing the migrations of swans.
I've been at this bird watching game, quite a number of years, and some were actually even classifying me as quite an ancient bird watcher. But I still have the kind of enthusiasm for this time of year. It's great. You know, we're at the end of March, early April. We're seeing things change, and we're seeing birds change. You know, the winter birds that are here, they've been here sort of for the last 3 or 4 months. They're now in their fine plumages, getting ready to head north, perhaps for their breeding. But we're also seeing quite a few of the summer migrants, the birds that are going to be here, or at least travelling north for their breeding season. And this time of year, I've been at this bird watching malarkey for quite a long time, as I've said, and it still gives me a great buzz. I'm out in the field this morning, and I'm doing some survey work. It's really quite early, and it's about sort of just gone 6:30, and I'm hearing chiff-chaff singing, chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff. You can perhaps hear it just behind me, and there's a wren singing there as well. These birds are setting up territory. Well, let me get back to chiff-chaff. These birds have wintered perhaps in the Iberian Peninsula. Some even may have wintered in the UK. But these are little warblers, and these are now sort of setting their territories up. And as a kind of a long-term bird watcher, you always kind of mark the turn of the season by when did you hear your first chiff-chaff? It's like, when did you see your first wheat ear of the year? Which is another early migrant. But a chiff-chaff is the one that kind of marks the change. But anyway, this whole kind of period of time, it's brilliant, actually. It's wonderful. Aren't birds brilliant, by the way? It really sort of sets the tone, and birds have been moving. And one of the most spectacular things of this bird migration thing has been the swans. Now, in the UK, we have 3 different types of swans regularly occurring, and there's the mute swan, which is the kind of the resident one, and they're big white lumps. Of course, all these swans are big white lumps, but the mute swan, if you look closely, you'll see it's got a red bill with a big black knob on it, and the males and females are slightly different because of the size of this little knob on their bill, and the males are called cobs and the females are called pens. So they're around all year round. But in the winter time, we get 2 species, although one of them is not so common in Northumberland these days. The first one I was going to mention is the Bewick swan, named after, actually, funny enough, Thomas Bewick, the well-known sort of 18th century woodcarver who lived in Newcastle upon Tyne. The species was named for him. But actually, we see hardly any now in Northumberland and Newcastle. So yes, it's quite a rare bird. But essentially, it's a big white bird with a black bill, but a little bit of yellow at the side of the bill. And that leads me on to the species that we do see regularly here during the winter time, and that's the hooper swan. The hooper swan is slightly larger than the Bewick swan, but with a big black bill. But on the side of the bill, it's got this yellow triangles. And with the Bewick swan, the triangle is cut short a little. But with the hooper swan, it's quite extended. And they're quite spectacular, these birds. They'll come down from, the ones we get, come from Iceland. And they come down in quite big numbers, and they'll get together in herds. But they'll also mix up with mute swans during the winter time. And we'll often see herds of swans in fields, rape fields, oilseed rape, feeding away, and they'll just sort of lie there. They'll drop onto the estuaries or the sea just for a wash and brush up. And but now we're actually seeing them move. They're heading north. And just the other day, I was out on the Allen estuary, and I heard this noise going past, and it was a little group of hooper swans. They've got this crazy noise they make, and but it's actually very similar to a number of other kind of larger species which are in migration, like cranes, for example. They have this kind of odd honking sort of noise, but it's a dead good way of kind of picking them up. You could, being so big and white, you could actually miss them, surprisingly enough. But anyway, one way to pick them up is actually the noise they make. But these birds are heading north in quite big numbers, and have been for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I saw some kind of use of technology, if you like. They put some GPS trackers on to these birds, and some birds which have wintered down near the Ouse Washes near Peterborough have been tracked towards the end of March, heading right through the central spine of England, if you like. and they've sort of set off from Peterborough, and then they've been tracked right through. And actually, they stopped off on Kielder Reservoir, and now they're heading north to get back into Iceland. And now these birds are quite amazing, actually, because they'll fly at quite high altitudes, and they have been picked up sort of by, it's said, by pilots. Flying transatlantic pilots coming down across the Atlantic, heading this way, and they've been sort of looked out the cockpit window and sort of think, what on earth is that? And this great herd of whooper swans making their migration south. What a sight that must be! Oh, I don't know whether it's true or not, mind. But anyway, so they're great birds. So yes, we have 3 species of white swan that sort of are occurring in the wintertime in the UK. The resident mute swans, and they're known as mutes because they don't say anything. And the only time you hear them is when they're flying, and they'll hear the wind going through their flight feathers, and that's quite an eerie sort of noise as well. And so yes, and there's the funny enough, the mute swans were introduced by the Romans, believe it or not. They're not native birds, introduced by the Romans. But the 2 wild species we have, the Buicks and the hoopers, I think they're quite spectacular. Now you think about another species of swan. What can I think of? Yes, think about Australia. Yes, Australia. They've got black swans. Yes, and again, I was down on the Aln Estuary just the other day, and I saw these 2 big black things flying down, and they were black swans. They obviously escaped from some collection or something, but they were free flying, so they were flying up and down. And the Australian black swan is all black, but it's got this red bill. It's quite sort of distinctive red bill. But in flight, they've got big white flashes in their wings, which is quite an eye catcher. So yes, that wasn't what I was expecting the other day. So I wasn't expecting another species of swan. But these are, just this kind of rogue sort of birds which are kind of escaped from population. They're not migrants or anything like that. These are just sort of escaped from captivity birds. But yes, that was quite a contrast, I can tell you, when you're kind of used to seeing just the regular swans. But yes, it gives you a taste. When you see these birds on migration, VisMig as it's known, visible migration, is so exciting. Birds just getting about their business without any recourse to humans. In fact, humans just get in the way and actually cause problems. But yes, absolutely brilliant. I love spring, actually. I love early spring. And, just get out there. And don't forget, yes, the clocks are going to be changing soon if they've not already done so, and we'll be out even earlier. I'll see you later, folks.
And so, to the sound of War Blackbird, here's Tom with some things to be getting on with in the garden.
So it's jobs for the week time, and have I got plenty of jobs in this garden at the moment. I look upon my unheated greenhouse. It just warms up with the solar energy from the sun during the day, and I keep the doors closed most of the time, apart from midday, let a bit air in to ventilate it, let some fresh air pass through, close them down again, and it builds up a lovely head of heat. And that head of heat is sufficient at the moment to keep going with steady growth. A lot of seedlings, which are fairly tough really, but seedlings which I've germinated at 15 to 20 Celsius, and then cool them down again, because you can't keep them at that heat at this time of year all of the time. So they've gone into the cooler environment to toughen them up a bit, because I'm looking after them until deep into May, maybe middle of May, something like that, when the worst threat of frost has gone. That's when I start planting out. There are some exceptions in there along the benches at the moment. I've got broad beans in 9 centimetre pots, and they're standing about 10, 15 centimetres tall, my goodness, and they're ready to go out soon into the open garden. I'm putting a little bit of cover over them just to protect them a wee bit from the frost. There are garden peas there as well, an old favourite for the show bench, Hurst's green shaft, long one, which has beautiful slim pea, garden pea, which has 10 to 11, if I'm lucky, 10 to 11 peas in every pod. Beautiful stuff. And the mange too. Now the mange too, I've just germinated some in pots. You've possibly gathered by now, I start a lot of my vegetables in pots here. Gives them a running start. They hit the ground running when you plant them out. Already got a root system. And here's the point, it keeps them well ahead in growth of those slugs and snails. The problem with, I still do it, of course, I still sow some plants outside into drills during the April-May period, but when they start germinating, they're small, and that's when the slugs pick them off. But if it's a reasonably established little plant ready for planting out, then the slugs can't keep up with it. It outgrows them. It's just a little thing that I've picked up over the years, which I really practice, because you've got to keep your wits about you with all these pests going around the garden. What else is in that greenhouse at the moment? Well, I have got the luxury of a 1 square metre propagating box, and there is an electric system going into the greenhouse, and that fires a soil warming cable. Doesn't cost a lot to run it, and that's where I do my propagation, but I don't turn it on until February. So February, March, April are my months for raising stuff in there, seedlings, stem cuttings. I have some chrysanthemum stem cuttings. They're rooted, they're potted up now, and they're standing on the bench. So there's quite an array of things. One little hiccup, last week, went in the morning. I've sown some asparagus. That's Conifers colossal. Yes, you buy crowns, of course, if you wish to get an asparagus bed fairly quickly. But my asparagus bed's 20 odd years old, and it's time to rejuvenate it. So I've sown Conifers colossal asparagus from seed. They've germinated within a fortnight, and they are going to give me a new generation of asparagus. What did I see the other morning when I went in? Mouse has been busy eating some of them. My sweet corn, it's dug down to the sweet corn kernel just below the surface. The sweet corn is about up to 10 centimetres now in growth, and they've left the stems and just gone for the seed. I'm being told by Judy, my wife, you can't set a trap, you can't do that. So I've got a catch and release trap, which holds up to 4 mice at one time. Have they taken interest in it yet? No. But I do hope they will soon, because I cannot afford to lose all my seedlings to a mouse, or mice in this case. Outside, I've been cutting the lawns, January, February, March, and I'll keep on cutting them. Once a month. There's a lot of moss in there. I can live with moss. I've left the moss. And the birds, I see them now, jackdaw for 2 or 3 chimneys down the lane. They've been collecting moss and popping them in the chimney to the nest. I see a blackbird with a mouthful of moss, and I'm thinking other birds are foraging amongst it. I want to encourage them all, so I'm not worrying about the moss. I'll talk about that another time. Okay? Whatever happens in the meanwhile, for goodness sake, enjoy your gardening. It's meant to be fun.
You've been listening to Gardener Tom Pattinson, birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, and Dr. David Petts from Dig Ventures and Durham University. Don't forget you can listen back to all our previous programmes via the Nature Garden podcast. That's the Nature Garden podcast. I'm Carl Steinson. Thanks for listening, and enjoy your gardening and time outdoors with nature. Bye for now.